You're somewhere. Maybe in front of people. Maybe just alone. And in your head, you're already somewhere else. In a version of life that feels a little more complete than the one you're actually in. Maybe you're speaking, and people are actually listening. Maybe you're in a place that feels like success. Maybe it's a different country, a different life, a different version of you where things just land better than they do right now. And it feels real in the moment. Not like you're trying to imagine it, more like you're inside it. Then something pulls you back. A sound, a notification, someone calling your name, or just that sudden awareness that you've been sitting still for too long. And you're back. The thing you were supposed to be doing still sitting there unfinished. If that's familiar, not because I described it well, but because you know exactly where you just went. This is for you. That thing has a name. It's called maladaptive daydreaming. And before I get into what it actually is, I want to say one thing clearly. It's not a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's not some inability to cope with real life. It's not you being dramatic about having a rich imagination. It's a pattern, a recognizable one, and understanding what's actually going on. Not just I zone out, but why, and what your brain is doing when it does, genuinely changes how you relate to it. Not overnight, maybe, but it changes something. So that's what this is, why your brain keeps going there, what it's been getting out of it, and how the same thing that makes it feel so good can also quietly work against you. I want to start with what's actually happening, because a lot of people who experience this have spent years quietly, assuming there's something off about the way they think. There isn't. There's a network in the brain, the default mode network, that activates when you're not focused on something external. So when you're not in a conversation, not reading, not actively solving something, your brain doesn't just sit there. It turns inward. It starts generating stories about you, your life, your relationships, unresolved stuff. For most people, this is just noise. Half-formed thoughts, something they need to do tomorrow, a weird memory that surfaces for no reason. For some people, it's closer to a whole production. There's a psychological trait called absorption, which basically measures how fully someone can get lost in their own inner experience. People who score high on it don't just think about things, they kind of inhabit them. The mental imagery is more vivid. The emotional charge is stronger. They can disappear into a book or a song or an old memory in a way that's genuinely different from how other people experience those things. And if you were a kid who played alone and didn't just play, you ran things, you gave your toys full storylines and dialogue, you played 3 characters at once and kept track of all of it. That wasn't unusual imagination. That was this. A brain with a lot of absorption capacity, doing exactly what it does, just with action figures to organize it around. That capacity doesn't disappear when you get older. It just goes fully internal. The toys go away, and the stories stay. Here's the part that I think matters more than the neuroscience of it. The content of the daydream is rarely arbitrary. Think about what yours actually involve. Not what you think they should be about, but what they genuinely are. For most people who experience this, there's a pattern. Some version of being successful, or chosen, or in a relationship that actually feels right, or just moving through life without that low hum of feeling slightly behind or slightly not quite right. A version of yourself where whatever's currently unfinished is already done. That's not your brain on autopilot. That's your brain being very specific about what it wants. Part of why this loop gets so strong is that the brain doesn't cleanly separate an imagined emotional experience from a real one, at least not in terms of how it responds to it. When you're deep in a scenario where something you want is happening, the feeling of satisfaction is neurologically real. Your nervous system is actually producing those states. So the brain figures out pretty quickly, this works. Whatever I'm looking for emotionally, I can get it here, faster than the real world offers it, and without any of the ways it could go sideways. And then it becomes a loop that starts to feel less like a choice. Something feels uncomfortable. Boredom, anxiety, the low-grade friction of a task you don't want to do. And you're somewhere else before you've really decided to go there. You sat down to work on something, and 40 minutes later, you've been in a completely different version of your life. You didn't choose to drift. You just did. People describe it as a craving, and that's accurate. It's the same pull as food when you're not actually hungry, but something feels off. Or the way you reach for music when you need to feel something and everything around you is too flat. It scratches a real thing. And once something scratches a real thing reliably enough, it becomes the default response, including to discomfort you weren't even consciously noticing. This is where it starts to become a problem. Not a crisis, but something quieter than that. The inner world offers conditions that real life just can't compete with. You're the author in there. You control the pacing, the other person always says what you need them to say, and the version of yourself in those scenarios is already who you're trying to become. There's no waiting, no uncertainty, no showing up before you feel ready. Real life is slow. Other people make decisions you can't control. Progress is invisible for long stretches. You have to begin things before you know how they'll go, which is basically all the time. So, without really deciding to, the brain starts running a comparison. And real life keeps losing. It's not dramatic. It's more like a task that used to feel fine starts feeling a bit flat. Boredom gets harder to just sit in. You notice that when your attention drifts, it doesn't go somewhere random, it goes somewhere specific, same place it always does. There's a concept called hedonic adaptation. Basically, we adjust to things, so the thing that used to feel exciting becomes the new normal, and you need more to get the same feeling. Maladaptive daydreaming can create a version of this in reverse. When your inner world is genuinely rich and emotionally satisfying, the outside world starts to register as thinner than it actually is. Not because anything is actually wrong with your life, but because the contrast has gotten steep. The cost of all this is usually quiet. It's not a breakdown. It's more like a slow gap accumulating between where you are and where you'd imagined you'd be by now, between the things that kept not quite getting finished and the time that went somewhere else instead. This is the part most people haven't heard, and I think it's probably the most important. For most people who've been doing this since childhood, it didn't start as avoidance. It started as a solution. A kid who's bored, or understimulated, or lonely, or in an environment that doesn't feel particularly safe or warm. That kid needs somewhere to go. If the outside world isn't giving them what they need, the mind will make it. Kids are genuinely good at this. It's one of the most resourceful things a young brain can do. Build an inner environment that provides what the outer one isn't. The child who played alone for hours, who had these long, elaborate, ongoing storylines, who could completely inhabit a character. That wasn't escapism in the dismissive sense. That was emotional self-regulation. That was someone building the most stable and rewarding world they had available to them, out of whatever they had. The problem is that the brain doesn't automatically retire the strategy when things change. You grow up. The original thing that made the inner world necessary might not even be there anymore, or it might exist in some different, quieter form. But the habit has been running for years, and it works, so it stays. At 25 or 30, you still have a nervous system that, when something feels hard or uncertain or just kind of uncomfortable, routes you to the same place it always did, inward, into the version of things where it's already worked out. What that was at 5 genuinely helped you. I think that's worth saying plainly. But a coping mechanism from a different time doesn't update itself automatically. It just keeps running, and at some point, it starts costing more than it gives. I want to stay here for a minute because I think this is where it actually lands for most people. There's something genuinely strange about this experience, and I don't think it gets named clearly enough. It comforts you, and it holds you back through the same exact mechanism. It gives you something you actually need. Some form of emotional relief, a sense of who you could be, and it does it in a way that makes the real version of those things slightly harder to reach. And most of the time, it doesn't feel like a problem. It just feels like your inner life, your imagination, your mental world. That's not broken. That's just how your mind works, and that's genuinely fine. But there's something worth sitting with, not as a way to feel bad about yourself, just as honest curiosity. When you're in your head, in that version of your life, what does that version of you have that you don't feel like you have right now? Because the answer to that is usually pointing at something real, not a fantasy, something you actually want, that your life is either slowly moving toward or hasn't quite figured out how to move toward yet. I'm not going to give you a list of things to do. That's not really what this is. What I will say is that trying to just stop, to white-knuckle your way out of a habit that's been running since you were a kid, doesn't tend to work. It usually just makes the pull stronger. That's how suppression works with most ingrained habits. What seems to matter more is actually understanding what it's been doing for you. Asking yourself honestly, right now, is this giving me something I need, or is it standing in for something I'm not building? There's a real difference between using your imagination to rest or decompress and using it as somewhere to live. One is your mind stepping out for a bit. The other is your mind deciding it would rather not come back. Those aren't the same thing, even though they can look identical from the outside, and sometimes from the inside too. The issue isn't the daydreaming itself. It's when the imagined version of your life starts quietly making decisions that the real version should be making. When the gap between who you are in your head and how you're actually moving through your days gets wide enough that it starts to feel like it can't be crossed. And here's the thing I keep coming back to, the person in those scenarios. The confident one, who has the relationship, who moves through things without all this friction. You didn't make that person up out of nothing. That's information. That's your own mind being unusually specific about what it wants. The distance between that and where you are right now isn't proof that you've failed or that you've been wasting your time. It's just, there's something you want, and you know what it is. You've probably known for a while. That's not a small thing. That's actually a place to start from. The daydream isn't the problem. The problem is when it becomes the place you stay. One thing, if you want to sit with it. In the comments or just privately, what does the version of you in your head always seem to have that you're still trying to figure out in real life? The next video picks up somewhere close to this. Specifically, what happens when people actually try to stop, and why most of the approaches tend to make it worse before they make it better. If that's familiar, it's probably worth watching.